The phone vibrated in my hand, and before I even looked at the screen, my stomach tightened, because somehow I already knew. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, tie loosened, shoes untouched by the door. The overhead light flickered like it always did, a reminder I kept meaning to fix but never prioritized. That felt like a metaphor I didn't need right then. I stared at the phone, face down on the counter, letting it buzz itself silent. There are moments in life when you delay looking at something not because you're busy, but because you're afraid it will confirm what you've been trying not to believe. I picked it up anyway. Her name. No emojis. No softening words. Just text. You'll die poor. I can't wait around while you figure yourself out. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower, as if different pacing might change the meaning. It didn't. That sentence didn't feel like anger. It felt like a verdict. I leaned back against the counter and laughed, a short, empty sound that surprised even me. Because part of me wanted to argue, wanted to defend myself, wanted to list the reasons she was wrong. But another part of me, the quieter one, the one I worked overtime to ignore, whispered something worse. What if she's right? I'd spent the last 6 years telling myself I was building toward something. That my job was a stepping stone. That the long hours, the stagnant pay, the invisible promotions that never came, they were all temporary. That one day, something would break open. But standing there, rereading that message, I couldn't remember the last time something actually had. I thought about the fights. Not the loud ones, the quiet ones were more dangerous. The pauses after she asked where this was going. The way she'd look at me when her friends talked about raises, houses, engagement rings. The way I'd feel my chest tighten, not because I didn't want those things, but because I didn't know how to get there fast enough. She used to say she believed in me. Then she started saying she believed less. Then she stopped saying it at all. I typed a reply. That's not fair. You know how hard I'm trying. Deleted it. I just need a little more time. Deleted that, too. That was always my defense. As if time was something you could keep borrowing without interest. As if it wouldn't eventually demand payment. I locked my phone and set it down, suddenly exhausted. Not the tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that comes from constantly explaining yourself. To your partner. To your parents. To yourself. I moved to the window and looked out over the parking lot below. A few lights were still on. Someone laughed in the distance. Life continuing without my permission. I wondered when ambition turned into anxiety. When did wanting more start feeling like failing at now? My phone rang. Not a text. A call. A known number. I almost ignored it. Some instinct told me I didn't have room for another disappointment tonight. But the phone kept ringing, steady and patient, like whoever was on the other end wasn't worried about being dismissed. I answered. Hello. There was a brief pause. Not the awkward kind. The deliberate kind. Am I speaking with? He said my full name. Middle name included. Born March 17th, 1990? I straightened. Just. Who is this? This call is being recorded, the man said calmly. My name is Daniel Hargreave. I'm calling from the Office of Estate and Asset Review, Department of Defense. I actually checked the screen to make sure I hadn't misheard him. I think you have the wrong number, I said. No, he replied. I don't. Something in his tone made my skin prickle. Not threatening. Certain. This conversation is time-sensitive, he continued. And confidential. I need to confirm that you are alone. I almost laughed again. Is this a joke? Did your mother ever tell you your father worked overseas? My mouth went dry. My father died when I was 6, I said. No. She didn't. Another pause. Shorter this time. Your father did not die poor, he said. The words landed wrong. Like they belonged in someone else's life. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. And if this is some kind of scam. On the night of your 9th birthday, he interrupted, your mother let you stay up past midnight because there was a thunderstorm and you were afraid. You slept on the living room floor. She sat on the couch and told you stories about places she'd never been. My heart started pounding. No one knew that. You cried when the power went out, he continued. Not because of the dark, but because you thought she'd disappear if you closed your eyes. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my chest burned. How do you know that? I asked. That memory, he said, was documented. I sank into a chair. This call will not be repeated, he said. You have 72 hours to respond once formal notice is delivered. What you are eligible to receive is substantial, but it comes with conditions. I swallowed. Receive what? An inheritance, he said, left to you by your father. I almost missed what he said next. An inheritance tied to assets valued at approximately $156 million. The room felt unreal, like I'd stepped slightly out of my body. That's impossible, I said. My father was a nobody. There it was again. That certainty. No, he said. He wasn't. The call ended. No goodbye. No reassurance. Just silence. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. My other message notification lit up the screen. You'll die poor. I read it once more. For the first time that night, the fear wasn't about money. It was about something else entirely. Because if everything I thought I knew about my life, about my father, my future, my limits, was wrong, then whatever was coming next wasn't going to save me. It was going to test me. And I had no idea if I was ready. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced the same slow circle over and over, like it was counting something down for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the man's voice again, steady, unhurried, certain. The kind of voice that doesn't bluff. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a scam. A sophisticated one, sure, but still a lie. That explanation was safer. Familiar. It let me pretend my life hadn't just been cracked open by a phone call that shouldn't have existed. I showered, dressed, went to work. That's what men like me do when reality gets uncomfortable. We default to routine and hope it reasserts control. The office felt smaller than usual. Fluorescent lights. Low cubicle walls. The quiet hum of people pretending to be busy while waiting for something better. I sat at my desk, logged in, stared at my screen without reading a word. My phone sat beside my keyboard, face up this time. Waiting. Every vibration made my pulse jump. Spam email. Calendar reminder. A group chat I'd muted months ago. Nothing from the Pentagon. Nothing from her either. Around noon, my manager stopped by. He leaned against the cubicle wall with the same forced smile he always wore when he wanted something. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said too quickly. He nodded like he didn't believe me but didn't care enough to push. Big week coming up. Need everyone focused. Focused. I wondered what that word even meant anymore. When my phone rang again, I didn't hesitate. Hello. Mr. The same voice said. You answered faster this time. My throat tightened. You said this call wouldn't be repeated. And it isn't, he replied. This is a different call. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked straight out of the office. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't ask permission. For once, something felt more important than appearing reliable. I need proof, I said as soon as the door closed behind me. Real proof. You'll receive it, he said. But not over the phone. Then why call at all? Because uncertainty makes men careless, he said. And I need you paying attention. That irritated me. Not because it was rude, but because it was accurate. I don't even know my father's middle name, I said. You expect me to believe he left me a fortune tied to the Department of Defense? Yes, he said. Because disbelief is the most predictable response. I stepped outside into the cold air and started walking. I needed movement. Stillness felt dangerous. Your father worked on applied systems development, he continued. Contracted through shell entities you've never heard of. His name doesn't exist in public records because it wasn't supposed to. You're telling me my father was a ghost, I said. I'm telling you, he corrected, that he was valuable. That word hit harder than I expected. Valuable. I'd spent years wondering why he'd been absent. Why he'd never left behind stories worth telling. And now this stranger was reframing the whole thing, not as abandonment, but as erasure. What exactly are you offering me? I asked. A transfer of assets held in trust, he said. Patents. Royalties. Equity positions. Liquid capital. And the conditions? Another pause. Silence, he said. Compliance. Discretion. I stopped walking. So I get paid to pretend none of this happened. You get compensated, he said, for not destabilizing systems larger than you. That did it. I'm not your father, I said. And I'm not interested in being managed. You already are, he replied calmly. By your debt. Your job. Your need to be seen as competent while feeling replaceable. I clenched my jaw. You don't know me. I know exactly who you are, he said. A man who stayed in a relationship longer than he should have because starting over felt like admitting failure. A man who tells himself next year will be different because admitting this year was wasted hurts too much. My chest tightened. You've been watching me? We've been aware of you, he said. There's a difference. That distinction didn't comfort me. Why now? I asked. Why tell me any of this now? Because your father's protections expired, he said. And because you're at a point in your life where the truth will either sharpen you or break you. I thought about her message. About the way she'd looked at me during our last argument. Not angry, just tired. You'll die poor. For the first time, I realized she hadn't just meant money. When do I get this proof? I asked. Soon, he said. Someone will contact you in person. Until then, do not discuss this with anyone. Especially not family. My mother deserves to know, I said. She knows more than you think, he replied. The call ended again. Same way. Final. I stood there for a long moment, phone pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. When I finally lowered it, my hands were shaking. Back at my desk later that afternoon, nothing felt real. Emails sounded hollow. Conversations blurred together. I nodded when spoken to and gave answers I didn't remember forming. All the while, one thought kept circling in my head. If this is true, then my entire understanding of myself is incomplete. I'd always defined myself by absence. By what I lacked. By the gaps I couldn't explain. A missing father. A career that never quite launched. A relationship that collapsed under the weight of waiting. What if those weren't failures, but unfinished chapters? My phone buzzed just before the end of the day. No number. Just a message. We'll be in touch. That was it. I shut down my computer and left without saying goodbye to anyone. Outside, the sun was already setting, bleeding orange across the sky. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt watched, measured, and strangely, chosen. Whatever was coming next wasn't going to ask whether I believed in it. It was going to demand that I decide who I was without the story I'd been telling myself. And I had the sinking feeling that when the truth finally arrived, I wouldn't be able to unhear it. I waited 3 days before going to see my mother. Not because I was busy, but because I was afraid of what her face might tell me before her words did. Her house hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same quiet street. Same narrow driveway with the cracked concrete she kept promising to fix. When I knocked, I already knew she was home. The lights were on. The curtains were half drawn. She'd always hated feeling exposed. She opened the door and smiled the way mothers do when they sense something's wrong but don't want to force it into the open. You look thin, she said. I'm fine, I replied. It was a reflex. One I'd learned early. We sat at the kitchen table where she used to pack my lunches. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. I noticed her hands before anything else. They were folded too tightly, knuckles pale. She was bracing. I got a call, I said. Her eyes flicked up, then away. From someone at the Pentagon. That did it. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. I don't know what they told you, she said carefully. They told me my father wasn't who you said he was, I replied. They told me he left something behind. And they told me you knew. She stood up and turned toward the sink, giving herself something to do. That was her tell. When truth got heavy, she needed motion. I wanted to protect you, she said. From what? She didn't answer right away. She stared out the window like the past might be waiting there. From inheriting his life, she finally said. I laughed under my breath. You think that worked? She turned, startled. What do you mean? I spent my entire adulthood trying to become someone without knowing who I came from, I said. You didn't protect me. You left me guessing. Her shoulders slumped. Just slightly. Enough to tell me she'd been carrying this alone for a long time. He wasn't supposed to exist, she said. Not the way you'd understand it. She reached for a drawer and hesitated before opening it. Inside was a folder I'd never seen before. Thick, worn at the edges. Like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times without ever being shared. She slid it across the table. Promise me something, she said. Before you look. I met her eyes. What? Promise me you won't chase this. I didn't answer. Because I couldn't. I opened the folder. Photographs. Not family ones. Surveillance style. Men in suits. Foreign streets. My father standing beside people I didn't recognize, always half turned away from the camera. Younger than I remembered. Sharper. Alive in a way that didn't fit the quiet absence I'd grown up with. One photo stopped me cold. He was holding me. I didn't remember it. The image was grainy, time-stamped, stamped in red ink. Property of D. My throat tightened. He worked on projects that weren't supposed to leave paper trails, my mother said. When he realized what they were doing, what they were covering up, he tried to leave. That's not what you told me, I said. I told you what kept you safe, she replied. I flipped through the pages. Contracts with blacked-out sections. Letters written in code. One document labeled incident report with most of it redacted. Was his death an accident? I asked. She closed her eyes. No, she said. The word hit like a body blow. He knew too much, she continued. And he refused to disappear quietly. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. My entire childhood reframed in a single breath. The nights she stayed up late. The way she flinched at unfamiliar cars. The constant insistence on keeping our lives small. All this time, I said, I thought he just failed us. She shook her head. He chose you. That hurt worse. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because men like him don't get remembered, she said. They get erased. And the ones who go looking for them don't come back the same. I stared at the folder. At the proof of a man I'd been told never existed. What do they want from me? I asked. They want you quiet, she said. They want you grateful. They want you distracted by the size of the number so you don't ask what it cost. I thought about the offer. About the silence clause. About the way the caller had said my father's protections had expired. I think they're afraid, I said. My mother gave a sad smile. They should be. I gathered the documents, stacking them carefully. My hands were steadier than I expected. I'm not him, I said. No, she agreed. But you're his son. That sentence landed with weight. As I stood to leave, she touched my arm. Whatever you do next, she said softly, don't let them tell you who you are. Outside, the sky was low and gray. I sat in my car without starting the engine, the folder heavy on the passenger seat. For years, I'd measured myself against an absence. A man-shaped hole I couldn't fill no matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to prove myself. Now I knew the truth. The hole wasn't empty. It had been sealed. And whatever I decided to do next would determine whether I stayed a footnote in someone else's story or finally wrote my own. As I pulled out of the driveway, my phone buzzed. A single line of text. We're aware you've spoken with her. I didn't slow down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from the past. I was driving straight into it. They didn't invite me to a building with a sign. No marble lobby. No flag out front. Just an address. An office park on the edge of the city, clean enough to be forgettable, quiet enough to disappear into. The kind of place you'd never remember driving past, even if you did it every day. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in my car, engine off, watching people walk in and out of nearby buildings with coffee cups and lunch bags. Ordinary lives. Ordinary problems. I wondered how many of them would trade all of it, every routine, every relationship, for the number I'd been told. $156 million. The number still didn't feel real. It felt like a concept. Like infinity. Too big to touch, too abstract to matter. Inside, the office was spare. Glass walls. Neutral colors. No family photos. No personality. A woman met me at the front desk and checked my name without smiling. "Phone," she said, holding out her hand. I hesitated, then gave it to her. "Keys too." That hesitation came back. Stronger. "I was told this meeting was informational," I said. "It is," she replied. "Information works best without distractions." She led me down a short hallway into a conference room that felt intentionally uncomfortable. Not cold. Not warm. Just controlled. Two men were already seated. One older, gray at the temples, eyes sharp. The other younger, perfectly still, like movement was optional for him. The older man stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm Martin Cole." I shook his hand. Measured. "We understand this has been disorienting," he continued, gesturing for me to sit. "Our goal today is clarity." Clarity. That word again. A folder waited in front of me. Thicker than the one my mother had given me. Heavier. "Before you open it," Martin said, "I need to be very clear. Everything you're about to see is contingent on compliance." "With what?" I asked. "Discretion," he said. "And restraint." I opened the folder. Pages of numbers. Charts. Holdings. Entities layered so deeply they barely felt legal. Patents tied to technologies I didn't fully understand but instinctively knew were valuable. Royalties that had been accruing quietly for decades. At the bottom of the summary page was the number. $156 million. No commas missing. No rounding. My chest tightened, not with excitement, but with something closer to vertigo. "This is the total valuation of assets held in trust under your name," Martin said. "Your father structured it this way intentionally." "Why?" I asked. "So that if anything happened to him," the younger man said for the first time, "you would be taken care of." I looked at him. "By you." The pause. "By the system," Martin corrected smoothly. I flipped the page. That's where the language changed. Clauses. Conditions. Penalties. Non-disclosure, Martin said. Non-disparagement. Non-interference. "And if I don't agree?" The younger man leaned forward slightly. "Then the protections dissolve." "Protections from what?" Martin didn't answer right away. He folded his hands. "From attention," he said. "From litigation. From risks you don't currently understand." I laughed quietly. "You mean consequences." He didn't correct me. I kept reading. Criminal penalties. Asset forfeiture. Civil exposure. "You're asking me to sign my name to silence," I said. "We're offering you peace," Martin replied. "Generational security. Freedom from financial pressure." I thought about her text. The way that sentence had cut deeper than she probably intended. "You'll die poor. What happens if I say yes?" I asked. "Then this money becomes yours to use as you see fit," Martin said. "Within reason." "And if I say no?" Another pause. This one heavier. "Then you walk away with nothing," the younger man said. "And we walk away from responsibility." Responsibility. That word tasted bitter. I closed the folder. "You know what's strange?" I said. "I thought seeing this number would make everything else feel smaller." "And?" Martin asked. "And it doesn't," I said. "It makes everything heavier." He smiled politely, like he'd heard that before. "Money doesn't change who a man is," he said. "It amplifies him." That line landed harder than anything else he'd said, because I knew what it would amplify if I let it. Avoidance. The instinct to disappear into comfort instead of standing for something. I thought about texting her. About the fantasy of sending a screenshot. About the hollow satisfaction of proving her wrong. And how empty that victory would feel. "Why tell me any of this?" I asked. "Why not just move the money quietly?" "Because consent matters," Martin said. "And because your father insisted." That caught my attention. "He built this trust with a failsafe," the younger man added. "He wanted you to choose." Choose what? Whether the money owned you, Martin said, or whether you owned yourself. Silence filled the room. I stared at the folder, at the neat rows of numbers that could erase every financial fear I'd ever had. No more justifying myself. No more explaining delays. No more feeling like I was falling behind an invisible schedule. And no more asking dangerous questions. Can I take this with me? I asked. Martin shook his head. You can review it here. Or you can walk away. I stood up. Both men looked surprised. I need time, I said. You have 72 hours, Martin replied. After that, the offer expires. I nodded, then paused at the door. If my father took this deal, I said, would he still be alive? Neither man answered. That was answer enough. Outside, the air felt sharper. Real. I took a deep breath and let it fill my lungs like I'd been underwater too long. Money big enough to ruin you. That's what it was. Not because it corrupted, but because it tempted you to stop becoming. As I walked to my car, my phone was returned to me, face down. I flipped it over. A draft message was still open. The one I'd never sent. I deleted it. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. What I needed was to decide what kind of man could live with the cost of that number. And whether I was willing to pay it. They didn't tell me everything in that first meeting. I knew that the moment I left the building. Institutions never do. They give you just enough truth to make you feel informed, and just enough omission to keep you manageable. The second meeting came 2 days later. Different location. Different faces. Same tone. Professional. As if we were discussing zoning permits instead of the circumstances surrounding a man's death. This time, they didn't take my phone. That should have warned me. We sat across from each other in a smaller room. No glass walls. No windows. Just a table, a recorder in the center, and a thin manila folder placed carefully in front of me. Martin wasn't there. Neither was the younger man. Instead, a woman introduced herself as a liaison. Not a lawyer. Not an investigator. A bridge. Before we begin, she said, I need you to understand that what you're about to hear is contextual. Not comprehensive. Meaning? I asked. Meaning this is the version that allows everyone to move forward, she replied. I didn't like that answer. She slid the folder toward me. Your father didn't die because of an accident, she said. And he didn't die because of enemies. I felt my jaw tighten. He died, she continued, because he stopped participating. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else she said. Stopped participating. As if integrity were a scheduling conflict. She opened the folder and began laying out documents. Memos, internal correspondence, reports with dates that stretched back decades. The story assembled itself slowly, piece by piece, like something designed to look unintentional. My father had worked on a system that wasn't supposed to exist publicly. A framework that allowed decisions to be made without oversight. Efficient. Invisible. At first, he believed in it. That part surprised me less than it should have. Most men don't sell their youth cheaply. They need to believe they're building something worthwhile. What changed? I asked. She met my eyes. He realized the system wasn't protecting people. It was protecting itself. He raised concerns. Requested reviews. Asked for limits. He was told to be patient. He was told to trust the process. He was told he was being emotional. Eventually, he was told nothing at all. He was asked to sign the same type of agreement you were offered, she said. A compensation package. Silence. Distance. And he refused, I said. Yes. That word landed like confirmation of something I'd always suspected but never articulated. He attempted to walk away, she continued, to disengage without causing disruption. I leaned forward, and that's when he died. Another pause. That's when he became a liability. I stared at the table, my reflection faint in its polished surface. So this inheritance, I said slowly, isn't a gift. No, she said. It's a containment measure. There was. The truth they'd been circling without naming. The money wasn't meant to reward my father. It was meant to neutralize him. And when that failed, I said, it rolled downhill. She didn't argue. He insisted on safeguards, she said. Conditions that would delay access. Force a decision. He wanted you to be old enough to understand what you were choosing. Old enough. I thought about my life up to this point. The near misses. The stalled progress. The feeling that something was always slightly misaligned. Did he know this would happen? I asked. She considered the question carefully. He knew there would be consequences. I closed the folder. For years, I'd carried a quiet resentment toward a man I barely remembered. A sense that he'd opted out. That he'd left my mother to clean up the mess. Now I understood. He hadn't opted out of us. He'd opted out of them. And you expect me to take the deal, I said. To succeed where he failed. She shook her head. We expect you to do what most people do when presented with security. What's that? Choose comfort. That word again. Comfort. I stood up. I need air, I said. She nodded. You should know, once you decide, there's no returning to ignorance. I almost laughed. That left the building a while ago. Outside, I walked until my legs burned. Past offices. Past parked cars. Past people who had no idea the ground beneath them was layered with secrets. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Are you okay? I stared at it for a long time before replying. I understand him now, I typed. The response came quickly. I was afraid of that. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, city noise bleeding through the windows. I replayed the meeting in my head, searching for cracks. For exaggeration. For plausible deniability. But the truth had a weight to it. A density lies never manage. My father hadn't died chasing money. He'd died refusing to trade himself for it. The inheritance wasn't an opportunity. It was a test. A way of asking the same question again years later, through me. How much of yourself are you willing to sell to feel safe? I thought about my job. My fear of instability. The way I'd let comfort masquerade as responsibility. And I realized something that made my chest ache. If I took the deal without question, I wouldn't just be accepting the money. I'd be correcting what they saw as my father's mistake. I stood up and went to the window. Somewhere out there was a version of me who signed the papers, bought space, insulated himself from consequence. And somewhere else was a version who didn't. The problem was, I could see both men clearly. And I knew exactly which one the system was counting on. My phone buzzed again. A single sentence from an unknown number. Your father tried to walk away. Then another. You have the same option. I closed my eyes. For the first time since this started, fear wasn't the loudest emotion in the room. Resolve was. Whatever I chose next wouldn't be about money. It would be about whether I believed a man could step out of a system designed to keep him small and survive the consequences. And deep down, I already knew. This was the moment my father died for. And the moment I'd have to live with. No one was watching when I finally sat down to decide. That felt important. There were no suits across a table. No deadlines spoken out loud. No voices reminding me what I stood to gain or lose. Just my apartment, quiet for once, the city humming outside like it always did, indifferent to the private crossroads happening inside these walls. I spread the documents across the dining table anyway. Not because I needed to read them again, I already knew them by heart, but because I needed to see the shape of the trap laid out in front of me. Numbers. Clauses. Signatures waiting for mine. Security, they called it. I called it insulation. For most of my life, I'd believed decisions were loud things. Public. Obvious. Moments where you stood up and announced who you were becoming. I was wrong. The most important choice I'd ever face came quietly, without witnesses, in sweatpants and a dim kitchen light that buzzed faintly above my head. I poured a glass of water and stared at it like it might offer advice. My reflection wavered on the surface, distorted, uncertain. I thought about the man I'd been before all this started. The one who stayed late at work not because it mattered, but because leaving felt like admitting defeat. The one who nodded during meetings, took notes no one read, and told himself patience was a virtue instead of a hiding place. I thought about her. Not the version from the beginning, when belief was easy. The later one. The tired one. The one who looked at me like she was waiting for a train she wasn't sure would ever arrive. You'll die poor. I finally understood what she'd meant. Poor in certainty. Poor in direction. Poor in the courage to risk instability for something real. The money on that table could fix all of that, or freeze it forever. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me, because fear wasn't the thing stopping me anymore. Temptation was. The temptation to let the money make the choice for me. To let comfort replace conviction. To let my father's refusal become a cautionary tale instead of a standard. I thought about him, not as a symbol but as a man. Sitting in some room much like this 1 year ago, realizing that participation itself was the price. They hadn't killed him for what he exposed. They'd killed him for what he refused to become. I set the pen down. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the thread I'd avoided since the first night. Her last message still sat there, unchanged. I didn't feel angry when I read it again. I felt grateful, because it had stripped away my excuses. I typed a response, not to send, but to see if I could. You were right about one thing, I wrote. I was waiting, but I'm not anymore. I didn't hit send. Some realizations aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be acted on. I went back to the documents and found the clause that mattered most. Non-disclosure. The words were precise. Legal. Cold. Silence wasn't just requested, it was enforced. Violations weren't punished emotionally. They were punished systematically. I flipped to the signature page and imagined my name there. Imagined the relief. Imagined the safety. Imagined the slow erosion of something essential. I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who believed adulthood would eventually come with clarity. That one day the rules would make sense. This was the rule. Comfort in exchange for compliance. I stood up and walked to the window. Down below, traffic moved steadily. Headlights blinked on as dusk settled in. People heading home, or somewhere else, carrying invisible decisions with them. No one would ever know what I chose here. There would be no applause for integrity. No recognition for refusing a fortune. That realization settled something in me. This choice wasn't about being brave in public. It was about being honest in private. I went back to the table and pulled the final page free. The one that offered full access. Full protection. Full silence. I read the sentence again, the one that bound everything together. Public disclosure voids all protections. I picked up the pen and signed a different document. The one that limited the transfer. The one that removed their obligation to shield me. The one that left the money partially intact, but stripped away the insulation. My heart beat faster then. Not with fear. With clarity. I knew exactly what I was giving up. And exactly what I was keeping. I folded the signed page carefully and slid it into the envelope they provided. No ceremony. No dramatic gesture. Just paper changing hands. When I sealed it, I felt lighter. Not safer, but truer. I sat back down and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts slowed. Whatever happened next, loss of work, scrutiny, pressure, I would meet it without pretending I didn't know the cost. I wasn't inheriting silence. I was inheriting responsibility. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I didn't answer. Some conversations only exist to pull you back. I turned the phone face down and left it there. Outside, night settled fully over the city. Somewhere in that darkness, systems were adjusting. Expectations recalibrating. They would notice soon enough. And when they did, there would be consequences. But those belonged to the man I just decided to be. Not the one I used to hide behind. The choice no one sees is the one that changes everything. And I'd made mine. The fallout didn't arrive like an explosion. It crept in quietly, the way consequences usually do when you stop cooperating. The first sign was an email. Polite. Impersonal. Due to shifting priorities, your contract will not be renewed at the end of this quarter. No accusation. No explanation. Just a clean severing, like trimming a loose thread. I read it twice, then closed my laptop without replying. For years, that job had felt permanent simply because it was familiar. Losing it should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I felt clear. Like a noise I hadn't noticed was finally gone. The next sign came a week later, when my badge stopped working. I stood in the lobby, swiping it again and again while people flowed around me, no one noticing. Eventually a security guard approached, apologetic, already briefed. "System says you're inactive," he said. Inactive? That word used to terrify me. Now it sounded like freedom. By the end of the month, calls I'd returned for years stopped coming. Emails went unanswered. Meetings I was once copied on disappeared from my calendar without comment. I wasn't fired. I was faded out. That was their way. At night, doubt tried to reclaim territory. I'd lie awake replaying alternate versions of my decision. The comfortable one. The quiet one. The one where I signed everything and let the system keep its secrets while I kept my safety. But every time that thought surfaced, another followed close behind. And then what? Another decade of insulation. Another relationship built on potential instead of direction. Another life shaped by avoidance. The answer never satisfied me. 2 weeks after the contract ended, my phone buzzed with a number I almost didn't recognize. I stared at the screen until it stopped vibrating. Then it rang again. I answered. "Hey," she said. Just that. No edge. No accusation. "Hey," I replied. There was a pause. The kind filled with old familiarity and new distance. "I heard you left your job," she said. "Yeah. Are you okay?" That question hit harder than any argument we'd ever had. "I think so," I said. For the first time in a while. Another pause. "You sound different," she said. "I feel different." We talked for a few minutes about nothing important. Weather. Mutual friends. Surface-level updates that didn't demand anything from either of us. Finally, she said it. "I wasn't calling about money." I smiled despite myself. "I figured. I just wanted to know if you were standing somewhere solid now." I looked around my apartment. Half-packed boxes. No job. No guarantees. "Yes," I said. "I am." She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath longer than she realized. "I'm glad," she said. So was I. After we hung up, I didn't feel the urge to chase the past. Or prove anything. The conversation felt complete, exactly as it was. The next fallout came from a place I didn't expect. My mother. She showed up unannounced one afternoon, standing in my doorway with the same guarded look she'd worn my entire childhood. "They contacted me," she said. I nodded. "I know. You could have taken the money," she said quietly. "They would have left you alone." "I know," I repeated. She studied my face, searching for regret. "What did you choose?" she asked. "I chose not to disappear," I said. Her eyes filled just slightly. "Your father said the same thing," she whispered. That night, an article surfaced online. Buried. Technical. Unexciting. A small investigative piece about outdated defense patents quietly expiring. About oversight gaps. About unanswered questions. No names. No accusations. But enough to make ripples. Enough to make someone uncomfortable. My phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. "You're complicating things." I didn't reply. A second message followed. "This path will cost you." I believed that. But for the first time, cost didn't feel like a threat. It felt like proof. I started freelancing. Consulting. Small projects that paid less but demanded more honesty. I worked longer hours than before, but they were mine. Some nights, fear still crept in. But it didn't stay. Because beneath it was something steadier. Self-respect. I hadn't won. I hadn't exposed anyone. I hadn't dismantled the system. But I'd stepped out of its shadow. And that was enough to make it notice. The fallout wasn't destruction. It was separation. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was standing upright, watching the dust settle, knowing whatever came next would meet a man who no longer needed insulation to feel whole. That realization didn't make me untouchable. It made me real. And that scared them far more than silence ever could. The money stopped feeling real long before it was officially gone. Not vanished, just irrelevant. I'd expected some dramatic moment when the final door closed. A call. A letter. A clean declaration that the inheritance was no longer on the table. Instead, it faded the same way everything else had. Quietly. Months passed. No follow-ups. No threats. No negotiations. Silence. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. My life started to sound like my own voice. Mornings no longer began with dread disguised as routine. I woke when my body was ready, not when obligation yanked me out of sleep. Coffee tasted stronger. Time felt wider. Work came in uneven waves. Some weeks were thin. Others were full enough to remind me I was capable. Not insulated. Capable. That difference mattered more than I'd ever admitted. I stopped measuring days by output and started measuring them by alignment. Whether what I did matched what I believed. Whether I could explain my choices without shrinking my voice. Some nights, I still thought about the money. Not as temptation. As weight. $156 million doesn't buy freedom. It buys a perimeter. A life padded so thickly you stop feeling where you end and the system begins. My father had understood that. I understood it now too. I visited his grave one morning without planning to. Just drove until the city thinned out and the road grew quiet. I stood there longer than I meant to, hands in my pockets, saying nothing. I get it, I finally said. Not forgiveness. Understanding. The past didn't need rewriting. It just needed context. My mother called more often after that. Our conversations weren't confessional or heavy. Just honest. The guarded edges softened now that there was nothing left to protect me from. You seem lighter, she said once. I am, I replied. And for the first time, she didn't look afraid of what that might cost. The article never turned into a headline. The ripples never became waves. Whatever internal adjustments were made, they happened out of sight. That used to bother me. Now it didn't. I hadn't set out to change the world. I'd set out to stop lying to myself. The man I was becoming didn't need villains or victories to justify his choices. He needed coherence. One afternoon, while packing away old paperwork, I found the screenshot. Her message. You'll die poor. I stared at it longer than I expected. She wasn't wrong. Just incomplete. Because poverty isn't the absence of money. It's the absence of agency. I deleted the image. Not out of anger. Out of closure. Later that evening, I walked through my neighborhood as the sun dropped low, watching people return to homes they tolerated, routines they'd accepted as permanent. I didn't judge them. I recognized myself. The version of me who believed safety was the same thing as purpose. The version who mistook insulation for strength. I wasn't above that man. I was past him. I didn't know what the next decade would look like. No roadmap. No guarantees. No inheritance waiting in the wings if I failed. And for the first time, that uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like adulthood. Not the version sold to us. Titles, numbers, milestones. The real one. The one where you choose what you can live with. The one where you decide who you are when no one is rewarding compliance. I reached my apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Nothing about it was extraordinary. And that was the point. I wasn't protected. I wasn't powerful. I was present. Whatever came next, success or struggle, it would meet a man who had already paid the price of clarity and found it worth every dollar he never took. The money was gone. What remained was mine.